This program is made possible through the generous underwriting grants of Hatter Williams and Purdy Insurance Services of Oceanside, providing North County with complete insurance needs for more than half a century. The TriQuest Corporation, providing quality office and manufacturing space in Oceanside. McCabe's Bridge Ocean View Restaurant for fine dining while overlooking the harbor and the Pacific Ocean. And the North County Times, serving all of North County with complete local daily news coverage and internet services. Hi, I'm Tom Morrow. Welcome to another edition of Living Legacies. Tonight we're talking with Jim Wootton, longtime Oceanside businessman. In fact, he's probably the oldest businessman in town with 54 years straight service at Wootton's Appliance. You started in 1946 here, didn't you?
46, yeah.
If there's someone that's as old or older continuously in business, I'm going to hear about it.
Well, when you speak of old, I just being a little touchy subject again here. I'm not sure if anybody's in town today that was here when I started, but if there are, there's only 2 or 3 of us left around here.
Well, as I said, I'll hear about it if there are.
Yeah.
Let's start with the beginning. You were born in Bisbee, Arizona, 4 years after Arizona became a state.
Yeah, back 1916.
1916.
So that makes me old too, 83.
You're just beginning.
Just beginning, I hope so.
Now, Bisbee, tell us about Bisbee. What was Bisbee like back in those days?
As a youngster, I should have realized how much more important it was what a place of history is taken in the old Wild Wild West. Bisbee, of course, is south of Tucson and right next to Tombstone. And actually, my mother's mother came to Tombstone when she was a girl, and my mother was born in Tombstone. So
she was there during the ERP era?
The early days, yeah. And so then we also had 2 other famous people in our neighborhood, Geronimo and Cochise. They both roamed the territory right around Bisbee, and matter of fact, in the Dragoon Mountains there's a place called Cochise Stronghold where there were lots of rocks. We used to picnic up in there, and then of course Geronimo was captured from there. And then in the early days, many people heard about Fort Huachuca. Well, Fort Huachuca then was a pioneer, early day concentration of troops that were there to protect the settlers from the Yaqui Indians who would come across the border to raid the farmers and the ranchers there. And
the Yaquis were kind of a band of the Apaches, but they spoke Spanish rather than
something like that. We called them different names. They called them Yaquis, and the Apaches we called Apaches. But in the early days, when I was a youngster, some of these things were still happening. But at the time, I guess I was too young to realize the importance of them. But then Bisbee is a copper mining town for those who are not familiar with it. But during the early days, the 3 cities called the 3 Bs, Bisbee, Butte, Montana, and Bingham, Utah, were the 3 largest copper mining communities in the nation.
Well, was this all Phelps Dodge?
Phelps Dodge owns Bisbee. Yes, there were several other companies in the early days, but it was Phelps Dodge. But
well, a lot of people don't understand, or a lot of younger people might not understand that Bisbee was one of those towns that existed because of the mine.
Yes,
and the company actually owned the town, didn't it?
That's right. You owned the company, as I recall, owned the land. You could build a house. You had 50 feet of the land, but you couldn't buy the land completely because it's all copper mines. And under Bisbee, the extent of the mining there, over 2,500 miles of tunnels underneath Bisbee. You go down a shaft, and some of them go down as much as 2,500 feet. And every 100 feet we had a level, which would be like a story in a hotel. And you got off, and then you'd walk for miles underground sometimes to digging out rock. And
well, today Bisbee is famous for having that open pit copper mine. That is the largest in the world, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't say it's the largest, but it was a big one. In its heyday, it was a very big one. And
goes down a couple of miles.
Goes down, and you went around and around and around to get the ore out of there, and it became too expensive to operate. And as a matter of fact, the mines are shut down now, but because it's too expensive to get the rock out of there, Bisbee's still built on tons and tons of copper ore. And
well, now, growing up, I remember in our conversations you told me that there was a time when you were just a youngster, you used to sit up at on the side of a mountain outside of Bisbee and watch the Mexican Revolution.
That's one more of the rather notorious things that take place there. But Bisbee's right on the Mexican border. The town of Naco is right outside of Bisbee, and during the Second Revolution, we could sit up on the side of the mountain and look down into Naco, where they were having some fights between the Federalists and the rebels. And a matter of fact, on what was called the Warren Ranch on the American side, there were 2 old biplanes were stationed there by the Federalists. And my dad, he was in this business. He primarily was a tin shop and plumbing and so on. And I have pictures where we actually made handmade bombs for these Federalists, and they would take them in their plane and go up and fly over and drop down off the rebels out of town there to, it was a pretty quaint way of doing it. But they actually had some shooting going on around there, and the troops then from Naco would sit or from Fort Huachuca would sit right along the border there just to
make sure they
didn't come over on this side here for us.
Well, the Buffalo soldiers were stationed at Fort Huachuca.
Yes, it was all, at one time they were all Buffalo soldiers, and incidentally, we still had Indian Scouts there. When I was a youngster, they still had Indian Scouts. We're using them there, and I've met many of them over the years. But now Fort Huachuca is a tremendously large, still an Army base, but it's now an entirely different type of organization.
What was it like growing up in Bisbee?
Well, probably like most any small town. Bisbee in its heyday was about 30,000 people, but today it's predominantly a tourist town. But well, it was different in those days. You know, we didn't have the problems you had today.
You graduated from high school in Bisbee at what year?
34. 34. Then I joined the Navy shortly after that. And in those days, you know, that was the height of the Depression. You had a long waiting list to try to get into the Navy or the Army, and I know I waited 9 months before I got in the Navy. And
jobs were hard to find, and a lot of the guys tried to get in the service just to have 4 square meals a day or 3 square.
You still had a lot of people out there begging and traveling around the country looking for some place to eat and something to do. So no, it was.
Did the Depression affect Bisbee, or those of you who lived in Bisbee? I mean, was there still work though?
Well, it affected a tremendous amount. Something that's unique about Bisbee is it was slightly segregated, not because of well, what's the word I want to say? Anyway, we had lots of miners that came from the old country, from England and Wales, and they lived in one town. We call it the Cousin Jack district, and we had lots of miners that came from the Slavic countries, and they lived in another set of town, and we had Mexican population at one set of town. Now, this wasn't done because of hostilities; it was done because of culture.
They had their own way of living and doing things.
Conversation, own way of celebration. Then when those kids went to school with us kids, we sort of intermingled, and it started out, but we did have that slight segregation. I remember one thing that was unique. Across from my father's store was a market there, a grocery store, and out at San Pedro, out on the river, a short distance from Bisbee, we had Chinese wood farming. And they still wore queues. They'd tear down the back, but for some unknown reason, the prejudice we had, they had to be out of town before sunset. That was one.
That was really.
It seems really silly today, but that's some of the things that existed way back yonder, and it was quite a natural part of
Well, speaking of, Bisbee being a mining town, and there was all these different miners and from all different cultures, and something rather interesting happened in 1927.
Well, no, it was before that. The one you're thinking about is the IWW?
Right.
No, that was during World War I. The IWW was the International World Workers. Now, that was the name of it. They were a communist group of people who came into town to try to organize the miners, and it created lots of tension. And the man whose name was Wheeler was the sheriff, and many of the townspeople got together and rounded these guys up and put them in a cattle car and shipped them to Columbus, New Mexico. And
why Columbus? That was the nearest city.
I don't know why Columbus, but anyway, that's.
But it was across the border, right?
It was out of the country here, and but there was lots of irritation that created a lot of aggravation for many, many years. And one of the little instances of it was my dad was involved with this deportation deal, and he was tried for kidnapping, but he was acquitted by the state, and so the whole thing was thrown away. But it's still, for people who, well, there are a few people still around probably would know about this IWW, but it was quite a deal, and they had the same problem up in the mines at Morenci, and so...
they never really succeeded, did they?
No, they didn't. They tried, but they didn't. There's a couple of books of fiction have been written about this, half truth and half fiction, which were quite interesting to read about the early days. But Bisbee is that whole part of southern Arizona is built with history.
Bisbee is the county seat, right?
Yeah. The Tombstone originally was, and they moved it over to Bisbee.
Was that Cochise County?
Cochise County.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you were in the Navy, joined the Navy in 34. You spent 4 years?
34 to 38, yes. And then I was discharged. I was made a second-class petty officer when I got out, which was pretty good for that short a time. But I got out to go back to school at the University of Arizona, and that didn't materialize. So then that was still, things were pretty tough. So I went to work underground in the copper mines, and I worked 2,000 feet underground.
Talking about things being tough, now that's pretty hard work.
Well, but I had calluses on there, big as eggs on there. It was,
how deep down in the mine did you go?
It was quite an experience. When I first, being a young man, thought I was rough and tough, but when I went to work with those damn hard rock miners underground, I learned out in the lesson. The strange thing was that frequently, or every night after mining, when they come out of the mine, they'd always stop by the bars, and get themselves a shot of whiskey and a beer chaser, and that kind of cooled them down. And it was quite a routine for the fellas there.
How deep in the mine did you work?
I worked 2,000 feet underground.
2,000 feet, that's a long way.
Yeah, I had a good job. Now, you understand the shafts going down this way, but how do you get shafts up? So that's where I worked. You start down what we call a raise, raise, and you start underneath here and you drill up 100 feet from one level to the next level. So the thing is, they could drop the ore down from that down to the lower level and into the cars. Then they would take it out and haul it up to the surface. But it was pretty expensive. Sometimes you could walk 1.5 miles from the main station, the level as we call it, into where you worked. There's tunnels all over Bisbee. Every 100 feet they had a level going down. They went down as low as 2,700 feet. How much
money did you make as a miner?
Oh God, I think it was started off at 87 cents an hour, if I remember right, and that was a mucker, as they call it, an apprentice. And when you become a miner, you got $1.12 an hour.
Well, that was pretty good money.
Yeah, I hope to tell you it was. Yeah.
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 So, 1938, you're out of the Navy. You've done some mining, and then it looks like there's going to be a World War. What happened then?
Well, I had a call back from the Navy. In the early days, when you got out of the service, if you stayed out more than 90 days, that more or less killed the deal. Well, the Navy was building up, and so they sent a notice out for a lot of ex-servicemen where to come back into the service. It would be 1 year active duty and 3 years in the reserve. So I left home to go back in the Navy, but in the meantime I'd done a very foolish thing. One day I was cutting down a tree during the eclipse of the sun, and it left my eyes in problems, so I had black spots, and I couldn't pass the physical for the Navy then, so they turned me down. But then I went to work for North American Aircraft.
Well, now wait a minute. Now you were over in California taking your physical.
Yeah.
Well, tell me that story that you were relating to me about how you happened to be going by North American Aircraft.
Being a country boy, coming back to, I happened to drive by North American Aircraft in Inglewood, and they were just now starting to build the Billy Mitchell bombers and the Mustang fighters. And where I stopped, well, I get out and look through the fence and see these planes. And where I stopped, fortunately, was right next to the employment office. So I had my Navy papers here, and I had a leave of absence from the mine in case things didn't work out, and I applied, and they took me right to work. And I went to work building wiring harnesses, sitting down on the table, instead of slinging its double jack, and made the same kind of money building.
It was a lot easier work than mining.
A lot easier. Then shortly after that, the shipyards opened up down at San Pedro, and I went to night schools to study ship fitting and went to work at the shipyards. And just before the war started, I made start in September of '41, just before Pearl Harbor, and the shipyards paid a lot more than the aircraft did, and so I worked there. Of the many thousands of people who worked there in the shipyards, after the war was over, the Navy kept me there for quite a long time. I was one of the last 3 employees of Todd Shipyard to leave after the war was over, and then I came to Oceanside. That's how I got.
How did you choose Oceanside?
Well, as the story goes, there, an old gentleman, I can't think of his name right now, there was, incidentally, Sherman, Ray Sherman, some people would remember him, Ray Sherman, but his dad Sherman had an upholstery or furniture store here in Oceanside, and of course, like everybody else, you went out of business during the war because you couldn't get merchandise, and there was a need down here, apparently an opportunity for a furniture store, so I came down there to explore, and I started down there in a little old building down there where Richard's Tire Shop is now. There was 3 little buildings, and we joined them together to make one larger building.
This is in South Oceanside.
That's South Oceanside, and that was quite out in the wilderness. People said, "What the hell are you doing way out here?" Well,
now this is 1946?
46, yeah. And there was only 2 rows of houses down there. Incidentally, a fellow named Potter, and Potter Homes built South Oceanside, and they're still probably the best values in town, all those homes. And
all those little homes over there on
there. Very lovely district, and he started building right after then, and one expression was, "Oh, God, you can't give these places away. When this war deal is over with, the bubble breaks." And so today, I bought 3 of the houses, and guess what? I paid $7,500. And today they were going for about $175.
You still have them, Jim?
No, poor judgment on my part. I sold them because I bought some other property and moved up there where I'm at now on Parnassus Circle. But
now, when did you move closer into town?
Well, that was in 1953. There was a South Oceanside then was still not part of Oceanside. We were out in the sticks then, and there was an opportunity to move closer into town, and I moved uptown. And
before we get into uptown, tell the audience about the getting refrigerators and appliances after the war. How you could have them all sold before you got into town.
Well, yeah, of course, like anybody, there was such a tremendous shortage of merchandise that. Several things, if you could find anything. When we go to furniture market instantly, and somebody said he had a mattress with springs in it, or a living room set with springs in it, boy, you didn't give a damn what it looked like or what the color of it was. You took it because...
this is up in Los Angeles?
That was Los Angeles, yeah. And mattresses, I know for Sealy mattresses, they had a shipping clerk up there. His name was Steve, and he played the horses, and he liked his liquor, and I'd go up there with my truck with a fifth of liquor or something, and I'd sit there alongside the dock, and he'd seal 2 pieces from that order and 2 pieces from that order. He'd give me about a dozen pieces of bedding and come back to Oceanside, and fast as we could unload them, they were sold. And same thing with appliances. If you got a hold of refrigeration, you had a long waiting list of people,
Well, one of the things that a lot of young people today might not appreciate is that during the war, all of these factories that made appliances like refrigerators and stoves and mattresses, they were making war materials, and they had to re-gear, right?
Yeah, they made more material, and it was quite a. It was very easy to start in business. Let me put it that way. All you had to do was find some merchandise, and
but that was the trick, right?
That was, go begging for merchandise to sell. So it made it very easy to get started, at least, and got us a foothold in Oceanside. And
so
what a blessings that's been, you know.
In '53, you moved into the downtown area.
Downtown area.
Is that in the same area that you are right now?
Well, almost the same place. The building where I have been, I sold a year and a half ago, and I moved into that building behind it. I was at 303 South Coast Highway, and I sold that building, and I moved to the building right behind it. So
what did downtown Oceanside look like in those days? I mean,
of course
are there any businesses still around that people would recognize? John Steiger had his realty shop.
John Steiger had his real estate office. Gosh,
Marty had a hamburger shop
Marty
downtown.
had a restaurant downtown, and the drugstores are all changed hands.
Clothing stores are gone.
Something that a lot of the young people miss today is the opportunity to go shopping in an old-fashioned hardware store. Oceanside had three of them. There was Shanks Hardware, and there was Bose Hardware, and Howe's Hardware. And of course, I was born in a hardware business, hardware, sheet metal, and plumbing. Appliances were sort of silent, though, back in the early days. Hell, if you could get one refrigerator, that was it. You still had wringer washing machine and scrub boards. But anyway, they all three were downtown Oceanside and were a tremendous asset, but things have changed now. The shopping centers have taken over. And
well, you and John Steiger are the oldest members of the Oceanside Rotary Club, which is one of the large clubs in town. You were president of the Oceanside Rotary in what year?
In 54, 55. God,
and
that's 45 years ago.
There
goes that word "old" again. It's needling me, old.
You and John were just inducted into the Rotary International Hall of Fame here
Hall
not
of Fame,
too long.
Yeah. When you served in Rotary over 50 years, you had that courtesy or that privilege. And I might speak something about Rotary. If people are not familiar with it, it truly is a wonderful honor for both men and women to become Rotarians, because worldwide the work that they do building peace and goodwill and understanding amongst nations and contributing to time, people think of maybe the money that Rotary gives, but the real important thing is the time that people give, serving themselves. Service above self, and he profits most who serves best. And I must tell you, I'm a very rich man for being a Rotarian.
I know you are, Jim.
What a privilege of being a Rotarian.
Now, how many refrigerators, I know that's one of your mainstays, how many refrigerators do you think you've sold over the years? Do you have any idea?
Oh, God. Probably 500 a year. Multiply that by about
46
or
more. 54.
Yeah,
right?
54 years.
Well, now you told me one time that you're selling to great-grandchildren of original customers.
Yeah. I have, fortunately, a lot of old. God, there's that word "old" again. How do I avoid it? But no, fortunately, it's if I might say, with a thought of great appreciation. The community has been wonderful for me, and I hope I've contributed something to it, at least that desire. And I'd like to stick around for another umpteen years. But secretly, I have a slight goal in the back of my mind, slight goal. I'd like to become to be 60 years in business, and then I'll be 90 years old. And I don't know if I'll make a both.
Well,
that's not far off, though.
Well, you've got a good start on that. Now, you were married. You had 3 kids. They're all still here in the area. Your daughter works for you.
Yeah.
And your son is
He's a machinist. He lives in Vista, and he's been a machinist ever since he got out of high school. He's been a machinist. And then my other daughter lives in Bakersfield.
We just lost your wife here recently.
Yes, unfortunately. Yeah.
But she worked right alongside you there.
Yeah, Margaret. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, Margaret and I were married 61 years, and I just lost her here a few months ago. So it's.
Well, what?
So I'm a bachelor now. I'm a bachelor.
Well, I know you're there almost every day.
Yeah, yes. I'm back full time now. I've been for about 4 or 5 months. I was kind of goofing off, but I'm back full time now.
You brought in a lot of members into Rotary. I know. You were inducting them.
Yes, I was inducting members for 30 years, I guess.
Yeah,
it's been a wonderful experience. I tell you, I can't. For people who really don't understand Rotary because we don't really publicize it, but worldwide, it's the finest organization of its type, and it enjoys a.
Well, Jim, you're one of the finest men I've ever met, and one of the finest businessmen I've ever done business with, and we've run out of time. We could go for another hour, I know, but I appreciate you coming in and telling us, sharing your life with us here on Living Legacies.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful experience being a part of Oceanside.
We've been talking with Jim Wootton, who's been in business here in Oceanside for 54 years, and he's got another 6 years to go when he reaches that 60 mark. I'm Tom Morrow, and this has been Living Legacies. This program is made possible through the generous underwriting grants of Hatter Williams and Pretty Insurance Services of Oceanside, providing North County with complete insurance needs for more than half a century. The TriQuest Corporation, providing quality office and manufacturing space in Oceanside. McCabe's Bridge Ocean View Restaurant for fine dining while overlooking the harbor and the Pacific Ocean. And the North County Times, serving all of North County with complete local daily news coverage and internet services.